Okay, great. You may all be seated. At this time, I'm going to do something a little unusual for me, just to make a little bit of a statement. I want to do something a little less theological than I normally would do, so I'm going to take off a couple of things. And I want to talk to you very literally for a minute. So the Torah portion this time is Noach. It comes from Genesis 6:9 and goes through 11:32. And so this slide right here just represents a literal summary of that passage. And I'm going to step away just a little bit so I can talk just generally about this. Normally when I come up here, a lot of times when you come to this congregation, when you hear a parsha, you hear some very intelligent Hebrew connections in the parsha, things that you might have missed were you reading this thing just from a very literal perspective. And sometimes when we do that, we see things, very deep, deep connections that help to interpret our walk, our daily walk, and the way we view the Bible, the way we view different stories can be colored in a way that you just didn't know, So it's like the Bible becomes three-dimensional when we jump into some of these deep, deep theological connections in the Bible. But what I want to do today is a little bit different. And the reason why I want to do that is because there's an opportunity here, specifically with this parsha, that's different than other parshas. There's a lot of claims that are made in this parsha that should have evidence in the physical world all around us. And throughout my Christian walk, as I grew up as a young Christian, I heard many people give me stories and interpretations of what you hear in the story of Noah that changed the literal interpretation. So much to the point where many people in our religion today do not believe the literal story. They think that it is more of a figurative story. They think it is a local flood. And over time, these little changes in the story have really diminished the value of this story. And I want to expand it. I really want to focus on that. So I want to be very literal today. And first thing I want to do is just point at, in this parsha, the biggest story is the flood. Right? There's a couple other stories that are in there. There's the vineyard, there's the Table of Nations, and there's the Tower of Babel. And many of these stories are called myths, fables, legends, things like that. And I want to be very direct when I say I don't believe any of that. I was going to maybe be a little bit sneaky and ask you how many people actually believe in the flood and see if anybody raised their hand when I'm snarky like that. But I already blew through it. I believe it. I believe the flood. I believe the literal interpretation. I want to give you some reasons to believe it too. Okay? So the first thing I want to do when talking about the flood is I want to make sure I clear up a couple of misconceptions. I think maybe nobody in this room has a misconception about the flood story anymore, but no, if I was going to ask any of our kids, how many animals went onto the ark? Do you remember? They came 2 by... Right? Right. Well, that's another aspect of the story. How many of our kids have heard this a distinction in clean and unclean animals in the story of Noah? We have well-taught kids. I didn't. Not me. When I was a kid, it was just 2 animals. Two animals of every kind, male and female. Maybe I was just a little bit confused if it was 2 animals or 2 pair. It was just 2 animals, the male and the female. That's not quite true, and the 40 days and 40 nights is also not quite true. That's only part of the story. And so there's 3 verses here. If you could open up your Bibles, look at those for yourself so that whenever I talk to you about these kind of things, I want you to take this as a starting point, and I want you to start proving to yourself what's there, what's not there. So first of all, just clarifying the story of the flood. 7:1, how many animals? So at this point, anybody want to throw out how many animals came? There was a distinction, right? 7 pairs of all the clean animals. There's a distinction made in the story that I didn't realize until I was much older. 7 pairs of clean animals. There's a distinction there, as if God is already planning on making them food later on. You'll need more than just one of each kind of animal, otherwise you end that food source. Second is the 40 days and 40 nights. Who can look at 7:11? Actually, it's not just 40 days, 40 nights. 7:11 talks about where the water come from. Is the majority of the water from the sky? Where is it from? It actually came from the ground. Majority of the water is coming from the ground. Why do I say that? It rained, God opened up the windows of heaven for 40 days and 40 nights. After that, until day 150, the waters continued to rise, and the source of that water were the fountains of the deep. He broke open the fountains of the deep. And I want you to start imagining now a catastrophe of global proportions, not a little one. There's some reasons why I want to say things like that. And I want to make sure that it's very clear. I mean, your entire theology will change. Honestly, if you think this is a local flood, it actually will impact your theology. It's not the same thing. There's some big questions that you have to ask whenever you look at things like, is it a local flood? I'm like, how smart is God if he has a local flood and he says, let's just put all the animals here. Why not just go over to the dry spot, where you don't have to be in the ark? Why would we have to get on an ark if it's just a local thing? That makes no sense, right? Okay, and then how long the waters prevail? 724, you find 150 days it's continuing to rise, all the way until it reaches a height above the highest mountains at that time. Okay? So if we're going to tell you there's a story, this real story of the Bible, that's this fantastic, then let's just step out of the Bible for a second. There should be evidence everywhere. There should be no way to hide this. Is this something that there is evidence of? I mean, massive, massive evidence. And not just the Grand Canyon. Yes, it's big. I think I got the Grand Canyon there. I'm talking about something way bigger than the Grand Canyon. Here are 4 things that I would like to bring up. But I'm doing the Torah portion. I'm not doing the entire lesson here. Otherwise, I could be here all day if I go into these 4. I could be in here all day if I just go into depth on the first one. I'm going to focus on the first one. But if y'all can read these, it says fossil at the top. Fossils, direct evidence of a flood. Okay? Second, the Tower of Babel, connections between languages, that there was a mother language at some point. That is another big, big thing. You should be able to find that. It shouldn't be something easily hidden. There should be lots of evidence, not a little bit, a lot. The discovery of the ark. Can you really hide that? Has an ark been discovered? Does anyone know of an ark being discovered? Lastly, dinosaurs. If Noah's flood is true, if the earth is a young earth, then dinosaurs would have to also be dragons. I mean, you have to put them together with humans. If you can't prove that beyond the shadow of a doubt, you're casting a doubt on the Bible. And so what I'm asking you to consider is don't just read the Bible and say, well, theologically it has this impact, but no literal, don't take it literally. If you say that and you don't look and find, is there really evidence or not, you're really putting doubt on your actual theological beliefs. Because these are big, if the literal story is not true, it really weakens the whole theology that's behind it all. Okay, I want to focus on one. I'm going to try to be brief. I'm going to do my best, but I think you can tell by my voice, very passionate about this. I spent years studying this. So just as a background, my background personally, some of this stretches me in my background. I'm a West Point graduate from 1999. I studied chemistry and life science. That was my major, and nuclear engineering. And so the whole study of biology and evolution, that was all part of my curriculum. I remember studying it, and I put much more work into studying about evolution, far more than my peers, because I spent years immersing myself in this. And I'll be honest with you, when I was in college, I was an evolutionist, and I believed that stuff. And I thought there was a lot of evidence for it, because I kept hearing about it. Oh, I would say things. I would walk around saying things like, that birds today, they're just modern dinosaurs. I don't know how many times I said that. It must have been, hundreds of times I said that kind of thing. Why? Because I heard it. Smart people said it, so I repeated it. I wanted to sound smart like them. And it made me feel smart to repeat things that I thought smart people were saying. But I didn't own it, I didn't know it, and I had to look into it and research it. This is now geology, and I want to talk about this because I think it's so compelling. Fossils. Let's just talk about a few things. Evidence for the flood, sedimentary rock. What is sedimentary rock? There is a definition that we use for it today, but a new interpretation of sedimentary rock that began in the 1700s. Sedimentary rock, by definition, would be rock laid down by water. Like sediment means the nasty stuff at the bottom of a large lake, pond, whatever. Make that old enough and dry enough, and you make it into a rock, right? So water-laid rock. If you take your phones right now, Google how much of the earth is covered in sedimentary rock, you'll get that answer. I put that answer up there. I already knew it, but I Googled it just before I came just to make sure that if I tell you this, it will say it. Well, it said it for me, 75%. Is anybody impressed with the fact that 75% of the earth's crust is sedimentary rock? So the question would be, what is the modern interpretation of that? How do you get around that? I mean, because if you go back to the 1700s and before, actually, you probably go before Lisbon. Lisbon was a massive earthquake that happened in the country of Portugal. Lisbon is the capital city. It was so big, it changed history to the point where the Enlightenment came and people started looking for natural explanations of things they already knew. And so from that point in time, later than that point in time, people would look at sedimentary rock and reinterpret that to say sedimentary rock is actually dust in the air that we're breathing. Given enough time, it collects on the ground, and what happens? It starts adding layers, and over eons and eons, then you have thick layers building up. Okay, so if anybody want to raise your hand and say that you can witness any of this? Unfortunately, the hand wave is time. Even though you can't see it, if I hand wave and tell you with enough time, that's true. If I go back one slide, just for briefly, just look at that picture. Can you see the sedimentary lines in the picture? It's the Grand Canyon. You can see for miles and miles. What are some of the interesting things you see when you look at those layers? The what? That's true. I mean, if you could just imagine, yeah, what do you see? Different colors. And what about those colors? Can you look in the distance and see the same colors over long distances? It's like, well, I can. I'm looking at like the tops of the mountains close by, and I see the same layers as way out in the distance at the top of those layers. It's as if they're so unbelievably perfectly flat, like a knife edge, over long distances. What if I told you that they are like hundreds of thousands of square kilometers or square miles all over the planet? These exact same layers all over. I mean, like you wouldn't believe. They're from North America all the way into Russia and in Asia. That's the same layer all over the earth. If the interpretation, just ask yourself, do you believe this? This is reasonable. If you believe the dust is falling on the earth right now and forming layers, then what should the shape of the layers be versus laid down by water? What would the difference be? If laid down by a massive ancient ocean, what would those layers look like? Would they look flat for miles and miles? Or would they follow the contours of the earth, of the bedrock? If it's water, you'd expect what you see, laid down by water. If it's billions of years, like the earth is 4.55 billion years old, then you would expect if millions of years taken to make the smallest layer, then it should follow the contours of the earth, and you don't see that at all. You see them abruptly ending wherever it's been washed out. And so I bring that up and a couple of other facts just to help push you to look at things in a new way and don't just accept things that you heard when your eyes can clearly tell you something different is happening. How many people have found a fossil? Justin, what was it? A shell. What did you find? Oh, interesting. A turtle egg. Okay, anybody else? What did you find? Shell? Fossilized turtle, shell. What would you? Interesting. Shark's tooth. Yes? Snail. That's cool. What'd you find? Shell. What'd you find? Clams. What'd you find? Go ahead. Jay. What? Clam. Okay. Anybody else? Shells, clams. No. So I'm just curious. Nobody found a dinosaur? You know, if you did, you'd be on the news because they're rare. What if I told you, would you believe me if I told you, based on your personal experience, that 95% of fossils are marine invertebrates. About 95% of the rest of them are marine plants. That doesn't mean the dinosaurs don't exist. They definitely, absolutely, I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is what you find is a bone here or there of dinosaurs, and they can extrapolate that into an entire animal. Sometimes they find an entire animal, unbelievably rare, extremely valuable. When they find those animals, what do they find? Is it sleeping on a pillow and died in its sleep? No? What does it look like? Yes, in the death throes of some catastrophe, you find that its head has been ripped off. The arms and legs have been ripped off and are some other part and guess what else is found with the dinosaur? In almost every dig, when you find a dinosaur and you find any other animal, what is with it? Any idea? A bunch of clams and a fish. Yes. Why? Why are they all mixed up? If I'm supposed to look at fossils and believe that if I go into deep layers, I find ancient fossils, and I go into more recent fossil layers, I will find much more advanced animals, but they're all mixed up in all the strata, then how am I supposed to believe what I'm hearing? So anyway, I bring that up just to help point out some of the, just some of the information that you can look, you can use your own eyes, you can use your own experience. You have the power to research this yourself, okay? So I bring that up, and one last thing, because I think I'm not way over on time. I'm okay. Okay, good. I'm always thinking I'm like so long. Okay, well, good. Well, maybe I'm talking a long time, but at least we're not late. Let me bring up my last point I intended to bring up when pointing out this. By the way, that can anybody tell what the picture is up there on the screen? Oh, I wrote it up there. They are giant fossilized clams in the Andes Mountains, yes. You know, if you look at the top of Mount Everest, you're able to cut up to the top of Mount Everest, what will you find up there? More of these, yes. What's the most interesting thing about the clams that are found up here? What's so weird about these things? One, they're enormous, and two, they're closed, yes. What happens when a clam dies? Has anybody ever been to the beach and found a dead clam? What does it look like? You find the shells. What do your shells look like? Yeah, well, yes, it's broken in half, right? Part of the shell is gone, or you find two shells and they're open up like a book, right? Like an open book. Why is that? The two shells are held together by muscle. The muscle relaxes whenever the animal dies. The animal is then eaten by animal like birds, ants, whatever. Okay, and the shell eventually pulverizes. That's the natural process that you see. Why am I bringing that up? The reason why that's important is because there are two very different points of view on the ways to interpret what you see. One is called uniformitarianism, and one is called catastrophism. Okay? Those are fancy words to mean everything that you see today has always been like that. That's uniformitarianism. Catastrophism is like a catastrophe happened in the past, and it has abruptly changed history. As in, the world, if I make a picture of the world the way it originally was, and then I make it into a jigsaw puzzle, and then I take all the pieces and I scramble them up, I glue them together, and then I make a jigsaw puzzle out of that, and then I take those pieces and mix them up and glue them together and make another puzzle. That's kind of what we're dealing with. So that's catastrophism. The world that you're seeing is actually a catastrophe on a catastrophe, okay, a massive catastrophe. And that's why you would end up with something like the dry land, even the highest heights are covered in sedimentary rock. I mean, something like that could be explained with a catastrophe. How else do you explain that with uniformitarianism? That's a tougher one. But the quote that you would hear is the key to the past. The present is the key to the past. And we find no vestige, this is no kidding, from 1785, we find no vestige of a beginning and no prospect of an end. That's James Hutton. Why then do we have the Big Bang Theory? That was because of the Hubble telescope. We ended up with a bunch of the uniformitarianists saying, ruh-roh. It is obvious that if I rewind the clock too far back, there had to have been a beginning. There's no way to get around it. And so they have to explain that. And I've looked, and there's no good explanation. There's no good physics. There's nothing that you can use to explain the Big Bang Theory. and the beginning of life, they still, at this point, would say aliens brought life here. Okay, so which is the group with the greater faith? Is it us, or is it the alien believers who think that life was seeded here through aliens? Okay, that was the last thing I wanted to talk about. What I want to leave you with is this. Learn more. Question what you hear. Read the Bible. Make sure that you believe it. If you don't believe it, then you really should be, I want to encourage you that you should feel motivated to go look into this stuff for yourself. You should own it yourself. You should be able to have an explanation to people who have doubts. Because this one thing right here, the flood of Noah, and the doubt of the flood of Noah, the doubt of young earth creationists, that right there is the one thing when our kids grow up and they go to college and they hear a contrary view, and they're sitting in class with a kindergarten crayon version of the Noah story, and they don't actually know their Bible, they don't know the facts, they don't know what's out there, and they can't stand up for it, they lose their faith. Time after time after time, you see young, Bible-believing youth excited to go to college, confronted by an atheist, and can't defend what they believe, and losing their faith for this story. So here's some places where I would just encourage you to go learn more. This one to me was fairly new. I hadn't seen this one until the last couple years. Is Genesis History. You can go to isgenesishistory.com. You can learn more. They have an incredible wealth of information from very credible scientists who will give you all this. They will go into any one of these aspects. Some of the things I didn't go into today, you can get into that information. Dr. Don Patton, the Turnage Patton Trail. If you go to Glen Rose, Texas, it's not that far from here, you will find tracks of dinosaurs going for hundreds of feet. Interesting. The most interesting thing you will not find on their website is this little fact. Human footprints walking across those dinosaur tracks in the same layer, on the same exact track. Human footprint actually going into the dinosaur footprint. Nobody knew it was there. We had to excavate to find that they were there, and it's in the rock, in the sedimentary rock. You can see it. He has many videos. Isaac Moseson, I bring him up because of the evidence that there is that the languages are connected. There are so much evidence, and I encourage you to go look into that yourself, edenics.org. Ron Wyatt actually participated in the 1980s in an opening ceremony of the national, what is it called? The Noah's Ark National Park in Turkey. Done a great amount of digging in that area, and they have a lot of there's so much there, it'll make you cry. If you didn't know it was there, and you can go and look at that evidence, just go look at it. Mark Armitage. He is not the only one, but he is just one of the more recent ones. Did you know that there was a Christian young earth creationist scientist who was a lab technician and a University of California professor? He was fired. Why? He did a dig in Utah. In that dig, he found a triceratops horn. He took that horn back to his lab, extracted from its spongy tissue. The tissue inside the triceratops horn was still alive. Now, why is that important? Am I saying that's because that dragons are real and that these things are just from a few years ago? No. I'm saying that that horn was found in a layer that should have been ancient, like tens of millions of years old. But why is the tissue inside it still alive? He did not write any of the implications of that. He just found bloody, spongy tissue inside that horn, inside a layer that was supposedly tens of millions of years old. Do you believe that? The truth is he found it. What I don't believe is that the layer was tens of millions of years old. You can read more about him, and I'm putting his name up there just to give you another place to go to look for this kind of information, okay? Why was he fired? He was fired because he published the results. He was not fired because he was a young earth creationist claiming young earth creation timelines in his results. He only published the results. The results were so devastating to the scientific community that they had to fire him so that these results hopefully wouldn't be known. Of course, we know, and they made it worse because they tried to cover something up. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, I give this all to you because I want you to stand on a rock. I want you to know that the Bible is true. I want you to know that you can believe in it. There's so much more, so much more. We could spend days and months going through the incredible amount of information. So, Shabbat Shalom. I hope this was a blessing for you.